Danielle Brooks had just tapped her phone to present her boarding pass when the flight attendant's eyes narrowed. Not with suspicion, exactly, but with that familiar flicker of doubt that black professionals know too well. "You're in 3A?" the woman asked, lips pulled into a smile too tight to be friendly. Danielle nodded, the same way she had nodded through 1,000 microaggressions before this one, and stepped into the hushed luxury of the first-class cabin of Sky America Flight 147 bound for Chicago. She didn't know it yet, but the woman who had just scanned her pass would soon be gasping on the floor, clutching her chest and muttering a phrase that would shake Danielle's career, identity, and sense of safety to the core. "She's not the one from the war." 20 minutes earlier, Danielle had entered JFK with the poised grace of someone used to performing excellence under scrutiny. Her tailored navy mule suit cut clean lines across her 5'7" frame. Her afro puff neatly pinned and centered like a crown of intent. She was en route to close what could be the most significant contract of her life, securing a 9-figure deal for Westfall Biomedical with her firm Harper & Row, where she was set to become the youngest black woman ever named senior partner. Every part of this moment was earned: the upgrade to first class, the loyalty status, the miles accumulated from years of red-eyes, depositions, and cross-country arbitrations. Still, she could feel the cabin hold its breath as she walked through. C3A greeted her with plush leather and polite indifference. She stored her briefcase under the seat in front of her, her mind already running through talking points for tomorrow's strategy breakfast. The flight attendant near the entrance, middle-aged, thin-lipped, with perfectly lacquered blonde curls and a name tag that read Parker, had smiled while scanning Danielle's pass. But it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Danielle caught the flicker of hesitation when she looked at the name on the screen. It lasted less than a second, but she noticed. She adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, took a breath, and pulled out her tablet. "Don't make it a thing," she told herself. "Not today. Not this close." That's when a couple white mid-60s boat shoes and cable-knit sweaters even in May paused beside her row. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice dipped in saccharine. "I think you might be in our seat." Danielle gave a polite smile, already knowing how this would go. "I'm in 3A," she said simply, and angled her boarding pass for them to see. The woman squinted. The man leaned forward, frowning. "This is first class, you know." That line hit with all the condescension of a slap. Before Danielle could respond, a voice behind them chimed in. "She's in the right seat. You can check the numbers on the headrest if you're confused." A black woman, maybe early 40s, seated across the aisle, gave Danielle a look of solidarity. The couple huffed and moved on, their luggage wheels thudding against the aisle carpet. Danielle gave a subtle nod of thanks to the woman, then exhaled. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. The moment had passed, but it lingered the way these things always do. She didn't know it yet, but this wouldn't be the last time someone questioned whether she belonged there. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as boarding continued. Ms. Parker reappeared, clipboard in hand, doing her routine checks. When she reached Danielle's row, she paused. "May I see your boarding pass again, please?" Her tone was syrupy but firm. Danielle blinked, surprised. "Sure," she said, holding out her phone again. The flight attendant studied it like it might sprout teeth and bite. And a photo ID, please." Danielle felt her jaw clench, but she complied. She handed over her driver's license. Ms. Parker looked from the ID to Danielle's face. Once, then again. "All good," she said eventually, but with that same clipped tone. She moved on. Danielle tucked her documents away with professional precision. Her heart was beating a little faster. She'd flown hundreds of times and never once been asked for ID in first class. Not like this. She let the memory wash over her, of being the only black girl in a Harvard law lecture hall and knowing that every glance carried a question mark. She was tired of having to answer questions no one else was asked. But she had no time for outrage, not with tomorrow looming. She glanced around the cabin. A businessman with salt and pepper hair met her eyes and gave a tight nod of acknowledgement. Danielle returned it. That moment of unspoken empathy said what words wouldn't. "I see what's happening. I know it's wrong." A chime announced, "Final boarding call." Danielle closed her eyes for a second and imagined walking into that westful meeting tomorrow. Contracts ready, arguments tight, her future sealed with a handshake. She was so close, but the turbulence hadn't even started yet, because in less than 15 minutes, Miss Parker would return, and this time, she wouldn't come alone. Danielle looked up from her tablet to see Miss Parker approaching again, this time with another flight attendant in tow and a different kind of energy in her stride. The warmth had evaporated from her voice entirely. "Miss Brooks," she said, louder than necessary, "we're going to need to re-verify your seat assignment. There seems to be a system inconsistency." The second attendant, a younger man named Kyle, judging by his tag, hovered uncomfortably behind her, eyes down, not quite looking at Danielle. Danielle blinked. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice level, though her heart gave a jolt. "I already showed my boarding pass twice, and my ID." Parker gave a sympathetic tilt of the head that didn't reach her lips. "Yes, but there's been a last-minute discrepancy. Our records show this seat may not have been properly upgraded." Danielle resisted the urge to laugh. She kept her tone professional. "I used loyalty miles for this upgrade 3 weeks ago. I have the confirmation email if you'd like to see it." She opened her phone and navigated to the Sky America app with practiced ease. "Here it is. Seat 3A. Confirmed. Upgraded on April 2nd at 10:14. The younger attendant leaned in to glance at the screen. Danielle saw the flicker of recognition on his face, but Miss Parker wasn't looking. She was staring past the confirmation as if the proof itself was inconvenient. "Unfortunately, our internal system still flags this as an unresolved seating issue. You may have to return to your original economy seat while we sort it out." As she said it like she was offering tea, like she wasn't attempting to humiliate a professional woman in a $2,000 0-cent suit in front of the entire first-class cabin. Danielle's jaw tightened. "No, I will not be returning to any seat but this one," she said calmly but firmly. "There's nothing to sort out. The seat was upgraded, paid for, and confirmed. If there's a glitch in your system, that's your responsibility, not mine." Around her, heads were turning. People were pretending not to eavesdrop while clearly doing just that. She felt the weight of stares pressing against her skin, the cold scrutiny that follows every black person who dares to say no with dignity. The woman from earlier, the one who had backed Danielle up with the older couple, caught her gaze and gave a small, supportive nod, but most others just looked vaguely annoyed, as if a scene was being made and Danielle was to blame for daring to insist on what she rightfully owned. Miss Parker's eyes hardened. "Are you refusing to comply with a flight crew member's instructions?" Her voice rose, intentional, weaponized. "Because refusal can be considered a federal offense under FAA regulations." Danielle inhaled slowly. "I'm refusing an unjustified instruction that has no basis in policy or reason," she replied, making sure each word landed like a stone. "If you believe I violated airline procedure, you are welcome to call your supervisor or the captain. I'll gladly discuss it with them. But I am not moving." Parker's face flushed slightly and her nostrils flared. "Very well," she said, pulling her radio off her hip. "Security to first class, seat 3A, passenger refusing crew directive." The sentence sliced through the air like a knife. Danielle's stomach sank, but she kept her expression neutral. Across the aisle, someone gasped. A teenage girl whispered, "She didn't even do anything." The older businessman who'd nodded at Danielle earlier now leaned slightly forward. "This is ridiculous," he said to no one in particular. "She's shown her documents 3 times. Parker shot him a glare. "Sir, please remain out of this. This is a crew matter." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Danielle, meanwhile, pulled out her phone and hit record. Her legal instincts had kicked in, uncoiling beneath the surface like a loaded spring. She held the camera low but steady. "I am recording this interaction for my own protection," she said aloud. "I've complied with every request. I have documentation for my seat assignment, and I am now being publicly singled out without cause." Kyle, the younger attendant, looked increasingly uneasy. "Maybe we should just double-check the manifest again," he suggested to Parker, who dismissed him with a sharp look. "The system already flagged her," she snapped. "We don't need a debate about it." Danielle's pulse was thudding in her ears, but her face remained composed. Her thoughts raced. Was this really happening? Was she about to be removed from a plane for being right? Her mind reached for control, for precedent, for protocol. Anything to ground herself as the moments spun further out of reason. Then, just as the security team appeared at the front of the cabin, something strange happened. Parker's radio buzzed again. She listened, her expression shifting subtly as a voice crackled through her earpiece. Her eyes darted back to her tablet, then back to Danielle, and for the first time there was uncertainty there. No longer cold control, but confusion. Her lips parted. "Wait," she said under her breath. Then louder, "Wait, she's not the one from—" Her voice caught, her hand clutched at her chest. "She's not the one from the warrant." She stumbled back a step, color draining from her face. Danielle froze. "Warrant? What warrant?" And then, in a movement both surreal and theatrical, Parker collapsed sideways into the aisle, gasping for air as the flight attendants around her screamed for a doctor. The security officers hesitated mid-stride, suddenly caught between two emergencies, one medical, one manufactured. Danielle sat still in her seat, phone still recording, as the words echoed through her mind like sirens. "She's not the—" That sentence replayed in Danielle's mind like a broken tape loop as chaos unfolded around her seat. Flight attendants shouted over one another, calling for medical assistance, waving down passengers with medical training. A nurse stood up from economy and rushed forward, kneeling beside Parker, whose eyes had rolled back, but whose lips were still moving. Danielle strained to hear them, and there it was again, muttered between shallow breaths like a haunting refrain. "She's not the one. Not her." Meanwhile, the two security officers who'd arrived at Parker's request were left frozen in the aisle, one speaking urgently into his radio, the other staring at Danielle like she'd sprouted horns. She was still recording, her phone perched steady on her lap, the red light blinking like a heartbeat. Every instinct in her body told her to move, to say something, to somehow regain control. But how do you respond when the accusation isn't even clear? Around her, the first-class cabin had turned into a theater of speculation. Passengers whispered and gawked. Some filmed. Others offered half-hearted expressions of concern to the crew while sneaking glances at Danielle like she was a walking headline. The white couple from earlier clutched their wine glasses tightly. A middle-aged woman behind Danielle muttered, "There's always something these days." Parker was now being lifted onto a stretcher by emergency responders who had boarded through the front entrance. Her collapse had delayed takeoff, and the pilot announced a temporary hold due to a crew medical emergency. But what held Danielle's attention wasn't the delay. It was what came after. "Ma'am," said the taller of the two officers, his voice firm but not aggressive. "We're going to need to speak with you." "About what?" Danielle asked, still seated, still recording. "We're sorting that out," he replied. "If you'll please gather your belongings, we'd like to escort you off the aircraft for additional verification." She didn't budge. "I'm not under arrest." "No, ma'am," he replied quickly. "It is a precautionary measure." "A precaution based on what? The word of a woman who just collapsed mid-sentence, whose accusations I've already proven false?" The officer glanced at his partner, then lowered his voice. "Her radio mentioned a warrant. That's why we were called. Something in the passenger system flagged your name." Danielle's pulse surged. "A warrant for who?" "Someone named Daniela Brock. That's all we have right now." Daniela blinked hard. She'd heard her name confused before, but this was a whole other level. "My name is Danielle Brooks. I am an attorney. I don't have any warrants. I've never even had a parking ticket." The officer gave a slight nod. "We believe you. But we still need to verify everything." The optics were already disastrous. Danielle could feel it in the way the phones were pointed at her. First class while black was probably trending already. The headline wrote itself. She took a breath, and stood. "I am complying under protest," she said loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This removal is based on a system error and not on any misconduct on my part. I am cooperating to avoid further disruption." The walk down the aisle was every bit as humiliating as she had feared. As she passed each row, she heard murmurs. What did she do? I knew something was off. That poor girl. One passenger, a black man in his 30s, gave her a solemn nod, the kind that said, "I've been there." Danielle nodded back, holding his gaze just long enough to remember that she wasn't alone. In the terminal, she was taken to a small operations office off to the side of gate C-17. The space was dull and beige and smelled faintly of old coffee and stress. A man in a Navy Sky America blazer introduced himself as Thomas Vance, customer service manager. He smiled tightly, the way people smile when they know they're in deep and hoping politeness can mop it up. "Miss Brooks," he said, gesturing to a seat. "We're so sorry for the confusion. There's been an unfortunate case of mistaken identity." Danielle placed her phone, still recording, on the desk between them. "Start from the top." Thomas shifted in his seat. "There's a fugitive named Daniela Brock. Facial recognition software at boarding flagged a potential match. That triggered a security protocol. Apparently Parker, our lead flight attendant, overreacted before confirmation." Danielle's expression didn't change. "Overreacted? She accused me of fraud. She summoned security. She humiliated me in front of an entire cabin of witnesses. We understand and deeply regret." "No, you don't," Danielle snapped, her tone ice-sharp. "You regret getting caught. Let me guess. This isn't the first time something like this has happened?" Thomas hesitated. "Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to speak on other cases." Danielle leaned in. "Good thing I am." By the time she left that office, the damage was done. Her professional email had been flooded with queries from journalists. The Harper & Row partners were pinging her phone. Her boss, Everett Lane, had left a curt voicemail. "We'll need to discuss optics and next steps. Consider taking the week to reflect." That was code. Danielle had worked in law long enough to know a pre-spontane when she heard it. And then, just as she sat in an airport lounge trying to piece together how a case of mistaken identity had turned her career into a liability, her phone buzzed again, this time with a new email. Subject line, "Passenger Flagging Protocol. Tier 2, Profile Verification Required." Attached was a forwarded memo. "Internal, confidential, from someone anonymous." It read, "Ensure all high-profile cabin routes include facial verification flagging. Pay special attention to booking patterns and demographic anomalies." Daniela read it twice, 3 times. The phrase echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. Demographic anomalies. She wasn't just misidentified, she had been targeted, and the deeper she dug, the more she suspected her own firm knew about it all along. She wasn't just misidentified, she had been targeted, and somewhere, someone inside Sky America had known it would happen. Danielle stared at the internal memo until the words blurred, her fingers gripping the edge of her phone like it might shatter. Demographic anomalies. The phrase wasn't just cold, it was calculated, coded language, a corporate euphemism for people who don't look like they belong here. Still seated in the quiet corner of the JFK lounge, Danielle exhaled slowly, trying to contain the tremor in her chest. She'd fought too hard, too long, to be undone by a system that viewed her presence in first class as a glitch instead of a given. And yet, the humiliating walk off the plane, the silence from her law firm, and the growing chatter online said otherwise. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harper & Row's HR director, Jessica Tamlin. "Danielle, we're placing you on paid administrative leave effective immediately, pending an internal review. Please refrain from commenting publicly while we assess the situation. Below that, we understand the timing is difficult and appreciate your cooperation." Difficult? Danielle almost laughed. The email tone was soft, but the message was clear. "You're a liability now." She replied with a single sentence. "Understood. I will be documenting everything. Then she opened her laptop and started doing what she did best. Researching. Building a case. The first thing she did was search for Sky America's publicly stated policies on cabin upgrades. Standard language. Points, miles, elite status, subject to availability. Nothing in writing about ID checks for first-class passengers. But when she filtered reviews by race and keywords like first class and boarding pass checked, a pattern began to emerge. Quiet, consistent, disturbing. One black passenger wrote about being asked 3 times to verify her seat. Another, a Latino doctor, had been downgraded mid-boarding due to a system error, despite confirming his upgrade days in advance. All of them were on high-traffic business routes. New York to Chicago. The deeper Danielle dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't coincidence, it was design. That night, she checked into a hotel near the airport, too exhausted to make it back to her apartment in the city. As she unpacked, her phone buzzed with a new number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Brooks?" "Yes?" "This is Vivian Chen. I'm a reporter with The Ledger. I'm looking into Sky America's passenger profiling system. I believe your case may be part of a larger trend." Danielle's silence hung in the air for a beat. "How did you get my number?" "A colleague of mine forwarded a screenshot from a forum where airline employees post anonymously. Your name came up in connection with something called Tier 2 flagging. It's disturbing and not new." Danielle didn't respond right away, but her pulse quickened. "Go on." "I've spoken to 2 whistleblowers who described an internal policy of enhanced verification for non-standard profiles in first class, meaning people of color, especially if their names match anyone in the warrant database or if they've filed previous complaints." "Did you file a complaint recently?" Danielle's memory sparked. "Yes. 4 weeks ago, after a delayed flight to San Diego, she had submitted feedback about a condescending attendant who'd referred to her as sweetheart 5 times in a row. She hadn't thought anything of it, just filled out the form and moved on." Now her stomach twisted. Vivian continued. "One of the employees I spoke to said they noticed a pattern. Anyone who files a complaint and travels frequently gets quietly added to the FRP, further review protocol, list. They claim it's for safety, but the effect? It's almost always used against black and brown travelers." Danielle sat down on the edge of the bed. "You're saying this is systemic?" "I'm saying it's policy," Vivian replied. "And I can prove it, if you're willing to talk." Danielle hesitated. She wasn't just a passenger, she was an attorney. A black woman in a white shoe firm. Every move had consequences. But silence had cost her more already. "Meet me tomorrow," she said. "No phones, in person." The next morning, Danielle met Vivian at a bookstore cafe in Midtown Manhattan. Vivian, sharp-aged and disarming, came prepared with files, printouts, internal memos, testimonials from former flight attendants. One document stood out. A PowerPoint presentation titled Premium Passenger Quality Optimization. It outlined how maintaining cabin expectations correlated with demographic consistency and included a section on quiet enforcement tools. One bullet point: leverage facial verification and behavioral patterns to identify non-conforming profiles discreetly. Danielle shook her head. "This is an entire architecture of exclusion, and they dress it up like efficiency." Vivian nodded. "They buried it under software, algorithms, system errors, but it's bias, institutionalized." Danielle's thoughts drifted to her firm. Harper & Row represented several transportation clients, including Sky America. Could they have known? Could they have helped? When she returned to her apartment later that evening, her building's doorman handed her an envelope, no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a typed note. "You don't know how far this goes. Check the drive and watch your back." She stared at the device in her hand. Tomorrow, she would plug it in. But tonight, Danielle sat at her desk, documenting everything, backing up emails, screenshots, names. The system wasn't just biased, it was built that way. And someone, maybe even people she worked with, had helped design it. Danielle sat in the dim light of her apartment, USB drive in hand, staring at it like it might detonate. The anonymous note had been typed on plain white paper, no signature, no hint of the sender, only that final line echoing in her mind. Watch your back. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she booted up a spare laptop she hadn't used in over a year, disabled Wi-Fi, and plugged the drive in offline. The contents opened into a single folder, labeled Internal Use, Compliance Review 2023. Inside were over 70 documents, PowerPoint decks, email threads, policy memos, all stamped with Sky America letterhead. But what caught her breath was one document titled Passenger Verification Protocol Legal Coordination Summary. It wasn't addressed to flight staff or even upper management. It was addressed to Harper & Row, LLP, her firm. The memo detailed a series of meetings between Sky America's legal team and select senior partners at Harper & Row, reviewing the airline's profiling practices and advising on how to reframe them legally if challenged in court. It even listed proposed language to soften terms like demographic screening and high-value cabin consistency into more neutral phrasing, such as enhanced fraud protection and customer profile verification. The line struck Danielle like a slap. Advised reframing FRP designations as algorithm-based determinations, not subjective evaluations, to minimize discrimination liability. Her hands were shaking. Her firm hadn't just represented the airline, they'd protected it. Crafted legal camouflage. They knew exactly what the policy was doing and how it disproportionately affected passengers like her. She scrolled further. A familiar name jumped off the screen. Everett Lane, managing partner. The man who had hired her. The man who had mentored her. And according to these documents, the man who had personally approved language shielding Sky America from accountability. Danielle felt the betrayal lodge in her ribs like a splinter. They hadn't just abandoned her. They'd been building the fence she was forced to climb the whole time. The next morning, she returned to the Harper & Row building under the pretense of collecting personal items. Technically, she was on paid leave, not yet suspended. Her badge still worked. The security guard at the front desk, unaware of internal politics, nodded as she walked in. She took the elevator to the 38th floor, walked past the glass-walled conference rooms she used to command, and slipped into her office. Everything was just as she left it. Framed certificates on the wall, legal briefs stacked neatly, a crystal paperweight gifted by a former client. She powered on her workstation and logged in. Her access hadn't been revoked. Yet. Amateurs. She navigated quickly into the firm's shared legal archives and typed in Sky America and FRP. Hundreds of results. Emails between partners discussing how to contain reputational fallout. Memos suggesting the airline had expressed concern about rising first-class upgrade rates among loyalty members under 40, and even case briefs involving other Black clients who had experienced eerily similar treatment. Danielle downloaded everything. Then, just as she was about to disconnect, an alert popped up in the corner of her screen. System Administrator Access Request initiated. Please contact IT. They were locking her out. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she closed Windows and ejected her backup drive. She slipped it into the lining of her blazer just as a knock landed on her door. It was Rachel Vaughn, a junior associate, who'd once confided in Danielle about experiencing racism during her clerkship. Rachel peeked in and whispered, "Security just got a call. They're heading up." Danielle didn't hesitate. She nodded her thanks, grabbed her purse, and strode past reception without a word. She didn't stop until she was down the elevator, out the rotating doors, and 2 blocks away on 47th Street. Only then did she exhale. Back in her apartment, she called Vivian. "We need to talk. It's not just the airline. My firm is in it too." Vivian's voice was calm but urgent. "You're not the only one. I've been contacted by 2 other passengers. Same airline, same story. but one of them says she tried to go public and got hit with a defamation threat. The firm listed on the letter? Harper & Row. Danielle closed her eyes. Of course, they weren't just defending Sky America, they were hunting down the people who dared to speak up. That afternoon, a brown sedan pulled up outside her building. It had no markings, no parking permit, no Uber decal, just tinted windows and a driver who never stepped out. It was there when she made tea. Still there after dinner. At 9:00 p.m., her neighbor texted, "That car's been outside for hours. Everything okay?" The next morning, her email access was gone. Then her firm bio vanished from the Harper & Row website. Then the calls started. Reporters, colleagues, even her former mentor Rita Nolan, leaving a voicemail that dripped with disappointment masked as concern. "You need to let this go, Danielle. There's too much at stake for all of us." That night, she received another message, this time from an encrypted email. "You're not the only one watching them. I have more, and I'm ready to talk. Name's Aaron. I used to run compliance at Sky America. They fired me when I asked the wrong questions." Then a second line. "Meet me at 11 tomorrow, South Street Pier. Don't bring your phone." Danielle stared at the screen, heart pounding. She wasn't just exposing a corrupt airline. She was stepping into something much deeper and far more dangerous. The next morning, Danielle left her apartment at dawn, dressed plainly in jeans and a windbreaker. No jewelry, no makeup, no phone. She took 2 different subway lines, stopped in a crowded coffee shop for 10 minutes, then walked the last several blocks to South Street Pier. She scanned the area. Tourists with cameras, runners with headphones, a couple arguing near a pretzel cart. Nothing unusual. Then she spotted him. A tall black man in his late 40s, beard flecked with gray, wearing a faded bomber jacket and holding a coffee cup with both hands like it was the only warmth in his world. He made eye contact and gave a single nod. Danielle approached cautiously. "You Aaron?" "I am." "You're early." "Good." They sat on a bench facing the water, backs to the foot traffic. He didn't waste time. "I used to run compliance at Sky America until I realized I was being asked to rubber stamp racism disguised as risk mitigation." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Passenger verification protocol?" Herring nodded. FRP was the internal label, but it went deeper. It started as a fraud prevention tool, flagging suspicious booking activity, but once corporate saw the data, they started adding other layers, demographics, complaint filed, past interactions. We warned them it could bias the algorithm. Their response? He took a sip of coffee. "First class is an experience. We're preserving that experience." Danielle exhaled slowly. "They built in bias and called it branding." Aaron nodded. "And when I flagged it in a memo, I was reassigned, then terminated. They said my division was being restructured. I filed an internal ethics complaint. That complaint never made it past legal." Danielle looked at him carefully. "Did Harper & Row handle that?" Aaron gave a bitter chuckle. "Of course, they reviewed their own client's behavior. Conflict of interest never mattered. The firm's partner, Richard Lane, even sat in on my exit interview, told me to be smart about what I say next." Danielle felt her stomach tighten. Everett Lane's older brother. Now it made even more sense. Aaron pulled a small flash drive from his jacket. "Everything's on here. Emails, PowerPoints, financial models calculating how many passengers they could flag without triggering lawsuits. And settlement budgets. They literally had a line item for PR cleanup." Danielle took it, slipping it into her coat pocket. "Why now?" Aaron glanced toward the water. "Because you didn't fold. You're doing what I couldn't, and they're getting nervous. I've seen it. Calls to vendors, emails to third parties. They're circling the wagons. You have a narrow window before they erase everything." Danielle thanked him and walked away without looking back. That afternoon, in a secure room at a downtown legal aid office, Danielle and Vivian examined the files. One email stood out. Subject, Westlake Industries, cabin, consistency preferences. The message outlined a corporate client request from Sky America's largest commercial account. Westlake. Danielle froze. Westlake Industries. The same company she had been flying to meet. The $100 million 0-cents deal she was set to pitch, and the same client her firm was desperately trying to protect. Vivian read over her shoulder. They're not just tolerating discrimination, they're engineering it. To keep their VIP clients comfortable. Danielle felt sick. Her own firm had pushed her to the front of that meeting, knowing full well she'd be traveling on a system designed to screen her out. Her presence was good for their optics, but not their seats. Vivian looked up. I think it's time we go public, not with just your story, with all of them. They put out a quiet call through journalist networks, support groups, and legal contacts. Within 48 hours, they had 19 passengers. Black, Latinx, South Asian, all with similar experiences. Same airline, same cabin, same errors. Several had received warning letters from Harper & Row after filing complaints. One man had lost a consulting contract after a viral video showed him being escorted off a flight while trying to defend a fellow passenger. Danielle organized the coalition. She brought in Gavier Green, a respected civil rights attorney known for handling class action lawsuits. Together, they built a strategy. Every piece of evidence carefully documented, every pattern mapped, every intimidation tactic cataloged. Danielle filed a pre-suit notice against Sky America, and within hours they received an email from a Sky America executive offering a settlement. Danielle only. Full apology, 6 figures, and a confidentiality clause. She didn't even reply. Instead, she booked a press conference. She stood before a wall of microphones at a community legal center in Harlem, flanked by other affected passengers and Xavier. The cameras rolled. I was removed from a flight, not because of a mistake, but because of a system designed to see me as a threat. A system built by a corporation, shielded by a law firm, and funded by clients who expect exclusion as a premium feature. The video went viral within hours. First Class While Black trended for 3 days. Civil rights groups joined the fight. National networks picked up the story. Sky America released a carefully worded statement about reviewing policies. Harper & Row issued none. The real retaliation began. Danielle's bank accounts were suddenly flagged for suspicious activity. Her building's maintenance staff reported someone trying to access her floor without credentials. A false ethics complaint was filed against her with the Bar Association. Emails sent to journalists mysteriously bounced. Vivian received a warning from an anonymous burner number. Back off, or we come for your family next. The coalition pushed forward, undeterred, and just when Danielle thought she had seen it all, she received a package, no return address. Inside, printed screenshots of her mother's prescription records. Her mother, who lived in a quiet Florida suburb, who had nothing to do with any of this. Danielle's hands shook as she held the papers. They are escalating, she whispered. They want to scare me into silence. Vivian didn't hesitate. Then it's time to scare them right back. They wanted to scare her into silence. But Danielle Brooks had already walked through humiliation, betrayal, and public scrutiny, and she was still standing. What terrified them wasn't her voice. It was that she refused to lower it. 3 days after the package arrived with her mother's prescription records, Danielle filed for an emergency injunction with federal court. Her legal team, now over a dozen strong and backed by 3 civil rights organizations, submitted hundreds of pages of evidence. Internal memos, whistleblower statements, racial disparity data, algorithmic code analysis, even surveillance tactics used against her and her allies. The class action suit was officially opened against Sky America, Harper & Row, and Westlake Industries. That same morning, a second whistleblower came forward, this time from inside Harper & Row. An email thread between senior partners revealed they had received advance notice of Sky America's profiling policies and not only approved the legal language, but actively suppressed complaints through intimidation letters and threats of professional blacklisting. One chilling line read, "Containment is key. A few aggressive settlements now are better than public scrutiny later." But public scrutiny had arrived, and it wasn't going anywhere. The judge denied Sky America's request to seal the case, citing overwhelming public interest. Within 48 hours, every major media outlet ran the story. Danielle's press conference was played in full on prime time. Public figures, celebrities, and everyday travelers flooded social media with stories of similar treatment. The hashtag #WeFlyToo joined first class while black. Sky America's stock dropped 18% in one day. Westlake Industries issued a hasty statement severing ties with the airline, claiming they were unaware of any discriminatory practices. But internal documents said otherwise, and Vivian made sure those made it to the press. Harper and Rowe went into full damage control, offering Danielle a personal apology, reinstatement, and a settlement with no admission of wrongdoing. She declined. Instead, she focused on what came next: real, enforceable change. Danielle negotiated a settlement on behalf of over 40 plaintiffs that didn't just include financial compensation, it demanded structural reform. Sky America agreed to end its demographic flagging system, replace its facial recognition tools, and implement independent oversight for all passenger complaints. The firm that once tried to erase her was ordered to fund a national watchdog nonprofit focused on racial equity in transportation, one that Danielle now chairs. 6 months later, Danielle boarded another Sky America flight to Chicago. This time, there were no stares, no ID checks, no whispers. The crew greeted her by name, with respect. And the woman who took her boarding pass? A black woman in a pilot's uniform, smiling warmly as she said, "Welcome aboard, counselor. You changed everything." As the plane climbed above the clouds, Danielle looked out the window at a sky that once seemed off limits. Not anymore. Her seat wasn't a symbol of privilege. It was proof that when one woman refuses to be moved, an entire system has to shift around her. Because first class doesn't belong to the few. It belongs to everyone. Have you ever seen someone stand their ground and change everything? Or have you ever had to fight a system stacked against you? Drop a like in the comments if this story moved you. And if you believe in justice over silence, in courage over comfort, and in equity that flies. Subscribe to our channel and share this video. Because the more we speak out, the faster these systems fall. Justice stories. Real people, real power, real change.